welcome back. I'm glad you're here today. If you're joining us after Easter, again, we're glad that you're here. We're starting a new series today called Builders. And it's going to be fun. I think it's going to have a really unbelievable message. I hope it'll be a lot of fun just to have this series together. We're calling it Builders because who doesn't like to build stuff, right? It's just kind of fun to build things. And in fact, in the Bible, God's people have been building things, and they build things a lot. Sometimes they build stuff like the temple, or the walls around Jerusalem, or the ark. Other times we find God's people building people, like families and communities and things like that. And one of the big questions we're going to be asking in this is, what are you building in your life? What are you building? And second, why are you building it? What are you building with your life? And why are you building it? And I know those are important questions, but that's kind of why we're here today, right? We are here because we want to explore and ask these more difficult questions of our lives so we can grow closer to each other, grow closer to God, kind of build that relationship in a more strong, with a better foundation. That's what we're all about. But like I said, at the same time, building is fun. There's a lot of TV shows on today about building. There's the flip it or the fix it type shows. There's the shows that explore building big stuff like the ancient pyramids or maybe the Great Wall of China. There are shows that talk about massive engineering projects that get built, like big bridges and stuff like that. Then there's Bob the Builder, right? Can we fix it? Yes, we can. Very good. Right. Then there's kind of the goofballs that build stuff. They're creative, though. Like, take this here. This is a urban tree house in China. That's kind of different, I guess, as you want to build a house. Or this one here. This is an old house. Gets a modern facelift. It's kind of different, I guess, if you didn't go around the back. Here's a guy who loved Tetris. Built an apartment complex. Got a little confused. And then, want to get away? It's kind of awesome, right? But we have these like creative things that come out of when we build stuff. When you take something in your mind and you create something cool with it. That's why for me, my favorite toy growing up was Legos. And I could play with Legos like forever. Now, this might make me a grumpy old man. Don't comment on that. But for me, I'm a little opinionated when it comes to Legos. I'm not a fan of the kits that kids use today for Legos. Like when my kids were littler, they got Legos. They always came in kits, like very specific kits. Like Luke had this one. It was the police station kit. And you got it out, and you open the instructions, and you followed the instructions, and you built, the police bike, and the police car, and the policeman, and the jail, and you put the donuts right in there. Lego donuts. But you had this whole thing, like you built it, and when you were done, what did he do with it? He put it on his shelf, and that was kind of it. And I was like, oh, that's kind of sad. And we go buy another kit, buy the fireman's kit, and it'd sit there. For me, I like old school, right? Because there's no school like the old school when it comes to donuts. For me, like, for example, you get that generic, box of Legos. Like, I asked Kevin for these. He had them in his office, which is awesome. Because like when you get the old school Legos, right, you get just specific ones. Like you get blue ones, that's cool, and you maybe get a black one on occasion, or a red one, or a green one. If you really fancy, you get a door maybe in your Lego kit. And then when I was a kid, I don't know if I should admit to this, we'd label them. We'd say this is a 4x4 or a 3x1 or 4x1. Anybody else do this but me? One person, maybe two, okay, yeah. But yeah, I did. I would label them, and I'd be like, hey, I need a 4x4. I need a 2x3, or whatever. And you go looking for these special ones. But all you had was in the bucket. That was all you had. Unless you were to hide them, I would. This is true. My brother and I would build Legos, and there's only you only had certain angled pieces to build a spaceship with. So what I would do is, ones I wanted to use a lot, I would unzip our couch cushions and stuff them in there and zip it back up. Yeah, I did that. It's true. Sorry. But you had to have the certain ones, and you dump them out and you'd spread them out all over the place. It was just fun. Because there's all these different combinations. You'd build your spaceship, and then what would you do when you're done with it? What would you do? You'd smash it up, put it back in the box for tomorrow. It was awesome. It was awesome. Not everyone loves Legos, though. There's a story I heard one time about two 6-year-old boys named Brian and Benny. Brian and Benny. And their mom was part of a book club. And so the boys were home from school, and so she had to go to this woman's house where the book club was being held. And so she drags along these two 6-year-old boys, Brian and Benny. They go to the house. And, well, the lady's got this beautiful, like immaculately clean, awesome house. But she knows that she got these boys over, these kids come over, and so she always kept like a little toy box in the back, where the kids can come over. She just pull out the toy box so they could play and do their own thing, right? Got a nice little hospitable kind of thing to do. Well, the boys come over, and so she pulls out the toy box, and inside the toy box are some Legos. Now, what is the first thing that kids do when they get Legos? Boom, man, you just dump that thing everywhere. You start digging through, right? Got to find my 4x4, my 2x2, my 3x3. They go together. You're looking for the pieces you want, right? Well, she sees this while she's doing her book study. She's looking over there, and she's thinking, oh, my goodness gracious. I got these Legos all over the floor. They're going to get everywhere, under the couch, stuck in my vacuum cleaner. And this little bead of sweat starts on her forehead. Can't listen. She just sees the Legos everywhere. And then she can't stand it. Finally, she sits down, gets on her knees and knees, starts scraping them together, all together, put them back in the bucket, and then gives one Lego to Benny and one Lego to Brian. And says, here you go. You can play with your Legos. Seriously? Like, you can't play with one Lego. Right? You can play with a car or an airplane, but you can't play with one Lego, right? Legos are meant to be what? Connected. They got to go together. You got to have a bunch of them to play with Legos. A Lego will never fulfill its destiny alone, right? It just can't. They're meant to be combined. It can't exist in solitude, which, by the way, is the same for you and me. Humans, people like us, are like Legos. We are meant to be combined. We call these groups families, teams, clubs, groups. We are meant to be connected and together like Legos. And not only that, I think we are like old school Legos, right? We can't fulfill our destiny in solitude, that's true, but also we're not a kit. God didn't just give us, here, go do this one thing. Instead, he gave us a bunch of opportunities and options to grow and to build together. There's a creativity built into us as humans to build and make new things and to be inspired and to inspire others. So today, in our first of our series called Building, I want to go to one of the first and earliest building stories in the Bible. One of the most famous building stories in the Bible. It's in the book of Genesis, which you'd expect. Now, Genesis, by the way, just on the side, is a lot like Matthew. Remember how Matthew, we broke it down and we said there's different sections to it that teach different things? Well, Genesis is the same way. Genesis has different sections. And the first section, 1 through 11, is kind of these epic stories. It's everything before Abraham. Before Abraham and Jacob and Isaac show up, we have these stories. And they're kind of a collection of seemingly random stories that aren't just history. They don't just tell us what happened and when it happened or how it happened. They tell us about God. They're these practical stories to be handed on to kind of show us the character of who God is. That's what these stories are about. So we have, for example, the creation of the universe. It's just not about how God did it or the timing of it or the order of it, but it's a God who stops chaos and orders things to be done the way he wants them done, and creation responds just with the word. It's the character of a God who creates and continues to create and order lives. We have in there the story of Adam and Eve and the first sin, when people began to break away from God, to do things their own way, and the consequences of those actions, the punishment for those actions, and God's grace to them despite their actions. Then you have Cain and Abel, the first kids, and they don't connect very well. In fact, Cain kills Abel over jealousy. And we see how our relationship with God affects our relationship with each other in that story. Or you have the flood, where God punishes his creation and yet shows great mercy and grace in the story, that God never gives up on his people. And so we have these epic stories. They're not just stories. They teach us about who God is. They explore jealousy and intentions and hatred and hypocrisy. All that stuff, by the way, is still around today. And so these stories in Genesis 1 through 11 are still very relatable to us today. So now at the very end of this section, in chapter 11, we get to today's story. And I know probably a lot of you know the basics of this story. You've heard about this story. But there are some really great building blocks built into the story that we're going to take a look at today. So let's take it Genesis 11. It'll be up here on the screen. It said, verse 1, all of the earth had one language and the same words. Now that's kind of your thematic start, which is kind of like, why mention that? Because there's not a lot of people around. This is after the flood. So if there would be a whole lot of languages, there's one, and they all can talk to each other. They all can do stuff together, which by the way, isn't a bad thing, that they could work together and they can do things together. We think that's good. The question is going to be, what's their why? What is their why for being together? Verse 2. When they traveled from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they settled there. So they're all together, and they're probably moving east, and they find this nice big open plain, which is good for what? What we can do on a plain that's really good for on a plain? Farming. You can farm, right? You can spread out, you can build a city, you can farm, you have some water there. It's probably a nice little spot. And they find this great little spot, but when they move, there's some consequences we're going to find out to going to this plain. Verse 3. They said to one another, because they have one language, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. And the bricks serve them as stone, and the bitumen served as mortar." So they're building Legos, right? Bricks. Now, why are they building bricks? What's the reason they need bricks? Because they don't have stones, right? If you're in the mountainous area, you've got a quarry maybe, or you've got rocks, you can stack them up, you can build stuff with stones. They don't have stones because they're in the plain. So they gotta engineer, awesome, a solution. So they make fake stones, and they call them bricks, Legos, right? And so they adapt, they engineer a solution, they get creative, they play to their strengths, which is fantastic. The first real engineering story in the Bible. Gotta love it. Then things go sideways. Verse 4. They said, "Come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the sky, and let us make a name for ourselves so that we will not be scattered over the face of the earth." Now, get some more details. We get their what and we get their why. Their what is they're going to build a city and what else? A tower. That's the part you know. Now, we're going to come back to the focus on the city for a minute because we kind of often forget about that. They want to build a city, which isn't a bad thing. They want to live together. There's security and safety in numbers. They can work together on the farms. They could share things together. They can have different skill sets if there are more than a few of them. Well, one's a farmer, one fixes farm stuff, whatever. But they can do stuff together. There's nothing wrong with that, with building community. In fact, community is actually very powerful and very important. There's a study done in Alameda County, California. It was a 9-year period, involved 7,000 people. That's a pretty wide study. 9 years, 7,000 people. Here's what they found out. People with weak relational connections, so they're isolated, didn't have a lot of friends, were 3 times more likely to die than those with strong relational connections. Did you catch that? If you have weak relational connections, weak community, you are 3 times more likely to die than someone who's got a strong community around them. Even those who had bad habits, like eating donuts, smoking, eating pizza, whatever, that didn't work out, didn't exercise, they were still healthier if they had healthy connections with people. Then the AMA, the American Medical Association, got 276, which kind of blows me away, 276 volunteers to be exposed to the common cold virus. Like, why? But they did. They got these volunteers to get the common cold. What they found out was that people who had strong relational connections, strong community, were 4 times better at fighting off illness than those who didn't. If you have strong relational connections, strong community, you're less susceptible to catching the cold, you get fewer viruses, and the third thing they found out, which is just absolutely amazing, you produce less mucus. I got the note right here. You produce less, which by the way would be a great for a church marketing campaign. Wouldn't that be awesome? Like, save on Kleenex, come to Chaparral. Or this is my favorite one. I made this up. Pick Jesus, not your nose. That would sell, wouldn't it? You put it up front on the front of the church. Pick Jesus, not your nose. Anyway, it's true. Okay, but here's the thing, right? So they're going to build a city. They're going to build community. But here's the question. What's their why? And they tell you. What's the why they build the city? So they didn't want to be scattered, right? We want to be together, which is okay, except that God gave them a command back in Genesis. And the command was, go and fill the earth. So he said, I want you to get out there. I want you to fill the earth. I want you to spread out. I want you to build everywhere. Get out there and do stuff. Don't just huddle up together. Spread out. And they're saying, no, we're good. No thanks. We want to stay together. We want to be all together in this nice little plane. I can put my mailbox out. I can put a little fence up. I can just kind of be a little comfortable right here. I just want to stay here. Their why went against what God had in store for them, what God wanted from them. And that decision to make their way on the earth, to make a name for themselves, to not be scattered, that tells us what the tower is all about. A lot of people read this idea that the Tower of Babel was to go to heaven, that they're going to make this way all the way to heaven, and they're going to kind of walk into heaven tomorrow at this big, huge tower. They never say that. And in fact, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you think about it. In fact, if I gave you a bunch of Legos, and I said, I want you to go out and build the tallest tower you could in Phoenix, what would you do first? Well, you get all the 4x4s first, because those are the best building ones. No, I'm just kidding. The first thing you do is you climb Camelback, right? Or go to Four Peaks and start building there. Because mine will be higher up there than yours will be here in the valley. So if they're going to build a tower to heaven, where would they start? On the mountain they came from, because there are stones and stuff there. If they build it on the plain, they got to start from the ground and make bricks and start building up that way. So if their intention is to get to heaven, they're not doing a great job. In fact, that's not their intention. In fact, what we probably know about the Tower of Babel is that it was a ziggurat, which is something like this, or like I made here in my little ziggurat. It's just a few levels tall, maybe 300 feet tall, but what it was designed to be in the ancient Near East, was a stand-in for a mountain. It was a mini mountain with stairs, so it's easy to climb. Okay? Because here's the reason why. Mountains were super important in the Bible, in general. So, for example, you have Mount Sinai, where God gave the Ten Commandments. You've got the Mount of Olives. You've got the Mount of Beatitudes, Transfiguration, Mount Carmel. All these places in the Bible where God meets his people. And you're thinking, well, why do they take place on mountains? They're hard to get to. They're hard to climb. Why do that? And even in the ancient Near East, if you go to different places in different cities, you'll find altars on the top of mountains. Well, because in their mind, the way they saw the world was that the heavens were like a big dome, and it rested on the mountains. Whether they believed that actually or just they had that in their mind, but that was the idea that the heavens rested on the mountains, and so if you want to get close to God, where'd you go? Right? So if you want to see God, you went to the top of a mountain, like that dude right there. Boom. Okay? So you'd go up there, hold on a second, there you go, to meet God. You go up to a mountain. The problem that was going on here with the Tower of Babel is if you move to a plain, instead of going to the mountain, you bring the mountain to you, and you put stairs in. And what begins to happen is they want God on their terms. You with me? They want to make God easy and that God fits into their little world where they're at instead of playing by God's rules. We don't want to be scattered. We want to be on the plain. In fact, God, we want you to come here where we're at and get started with us. And we do that too, a lot. We want God on our terms. God, build with the kit I'm going to give you to build with. Remember the Berenstein Bears? There's a book, they didn't write the book, I guess, but there's a book about them called About a Picnic. Right? And they want to go find the perfect place for a picnic. And they start going all over the place to find the perfect place for a picnic. And the first place they go to has got these trains. And it says, Pop, I do not like to complain, but your wonderful spot is next to a train. There's these loudness, and so they go someplace else, and there's like, some kids playing, and then they go someplace else, there's mosquitoes, and they go someplace else, and there's airplanes making noise. I do not like to say so that another good spot has gone bad. Look, every spot has gone bad for these guys. And where do they end up? Right back at home at the kitchen table having dinner. Because here's the truth of it. I get it. Like, we want to make everything just right and perfect. And God to meet us in that perfect spot. Like, God, I want my life the way I want my life. I want to arrange everything the way I want to arrange them. I want everything to be safe and secure and perfect and good for me. And then, God, you meet me where that place is. And here's the kit to tell God how to build my life. It doesn't work that way. In fact, God gives us blocks. He says, go and build where you're at. Go build what I called you to build. Spread out. Be creative. Use ingenuity. Get involved in the world. Do cool things where you're at. Build towers where they need to be built. And so God is going to deal with these people. And this attitude, their why, is focusing on them. Verse 5. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which humanity had built. And I love that. It's kind of like, here's this great tower they built, this huge, tall tower. And what does God do? Oh, like it's way down there. Let's go check out that tower they built that's so big, right? I mean, like God's going to come down to where they're at. And then it says, the Lord said, as if one people with one language for all of them, this is how they've begun to act. Right? If they have one language and are all together, and this is how they're going to do things, now nothing they devise to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language there, so that each person will not be able to understand the language of his friend. Now, if God was worried about the tower, what could he have done? He could have broken the tower up, right, and put it back in the box. But he didn't. He went after their why. It wasn't the tower. It was the why behind the tower. And so he begins then to change their languages so that they would have to spread out and do the very thing that God called them to do. Go out and fill the earth. Now, there's something else about this story that really impacts me personally. It's something I never expected to learn, something I didn't really see in this story until several years ago. And I want to share it with you because I hope, maybe, it'll help your faith the way it did mine. It's kind of an off-topic kind of piece to the story, but it really fits with what's going on here. I wasn't looking for it. Now, most of you know that I have an engineering degree in aerospace engineering, which is why I like Legos so much, like building stuff. But in graduate school, I took doctoral classes in historical linguistics. I know that sounds like so much fun, right? That is so cool. Historical linguistics. That's just awesome. It's not. It's a secular studies program at University of Georgia, and the idea was you study ancient languages, and I did it because I wanted to know Greek and Hebrew better for biblical studies. I thought, well, let's look at the languages, but it was a secular program, and what you studied was how languages change and develop over time. Awesome, right? Yes, as boring as it sounds, but it was actually interesting in some ways. Here's what applies now to what's going on here, because we use language all the time. The first truth of historical linguistics is that languages degrade over time. Y'all believe me on that? They do, right? I mean, if you think about it, in English, which most of you speak, each noun has two forms. What are they? Singular and plural. That's it. It's pretty easy. Like you have a block or blocks. Easy. Well, English is related to Greek, Latin, and so forth. Ancient Greek, for every noun, had 10 forms of that noun. 10, not 2. 5 singular, 5 plural. Wouldn't that be fun in grade school? Sanskrit, which is kind of before Greek, it had 12 to 14 forms of every noun. And that was the easy part. The verbs were crazy complicated. Like crazy, annoying complicated. So you had to memorize all these forms. And now we're talking 30, 40, 50 forms of one verb. It's crazy. Now here's my question, though, that's more relative to that. As these words began to degrade over time, you look back along history, what do you find? They got more complex when you go backwards, which means that if you go way, way, way back to the very beginning of language, what do you find? Very, very complex languages. So that's kind of weird, isn't it? If things are falling apart and devolving, why would they start off so complicated? It's kind of like, it doesn't make sense that people, humans, start off with grunts and groans and pointing to their Legos, I need a 4x2, kind of stuff, and then develop into a very, very complex language, only to one day turn around and have it fall apart again, right? That doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? So it's almost like maybe God gave us language. We think in language. We use language. We communicate in language. Like maybe God gave humans language. That'd be kind of cool. Something else about this, too, that go one step deeper. Certain languages are parts of families. Okay, so for example, we speak English. Okay? And English is related to what's called the Indo-European language family. So like English, German, French, Russian, Hindi, believe it or not, Greek, Italian, all those are the same language family that's ancient. All these languages came from this one. So like, for example, the word for English for father is father. In Greek, it's pater. They're very, very similar words. There's another family called Semitic, which is like Arabic, Hebrew, Amharic, and Ethiopian. And they're very different too. And here's what's really cool about this, and how they're so different on a core level. I know I'm getting excited about that, and you're thinking, this is really weird, but just hold with me for a second. Okay? These two letters in English, what's that word? Pit, pat. Okay, just put a vowel in, you get a different word, right? If you play Scrabble, this is like your thing. Okay? Now, is a pet related to a pot in any way? Unless you really like cooking and you've got a pet pot, it's not going to go together. Right? They're different things. Like they're totally different. So when I put a vowel, I get different stuff. So in this language family, they're all like that. The vowels make a word mean something. A pit or a pot or a pat or whatever. Here's the cool part. In these language families, it's totally different. How they use language, how they see words, how they see vowels is totally, radically different than these. So for example, in Hebrew, if I had that same letter combination, PT, by the way, I looked it up this morning because I always do this example, I never looked up the word. The letters PT in Hebrew mean to break. All right, Stephen, go to the next slide with the PT on it again. All right, so here. So if you look this up in a Hebrew dictionary, it means to break. But when I put different vowels here, you know what I get? I don't get different words. I get the noun, the verb, the adjective, the participle, right? So I get, this always means to break. But maybe pot might mean I'm breaking something, or pat means a fragment of something. They're all related to the same word, the same meaning. And the vowels just tell you what kind of word it is. Verb, noun, adjective, whatever. So that means that at the very core of these languages, something happened to make them different at the core root level. How they think about words, how they think about vowels. What does that sound like to you? Like someone came in and did that. It didn't just happen. This is the story of Babel that we use every day. Right? When God said, let's go down and confuse their language, it was an intentional thing. And we see it active in everyday life. If you want proof of creation and proof of God, this is one of them. When you talk and you use language, you are proving God exists, because how we use language had to come from a creator. And how it's divided and changes comes from a creator. And I love that about this story. See, this story is so crucial to us in our lives. It's how we talk. But it's also speaking about our why. What is our why? We need community, we said that, but what is our community built around? Is it based on our rules, or is it based on God's rules? Do we want God on our terms, or is our community based on what God's terms are? And in fact, that quest that God gave his people to go and fill the earth hasn't changed. Last week at Easter, we said, Jesus went to his disciples. Last thing he says to them is what? Go and make disciples of all nations. Get out there. Fill the earth. In Acts 2, the first church starts, and what happens? They're in Jerusalem. The Spirit of God shows up. People are there from everywhere, different languages, all in Jerusalem. And the disciples teach about Jesus, and everyone understands them. It's like Babel reverses itself. They all hear in their own language. Like God is calling them back to build again, but to build a community that is spread out throughout the world. That community was called the church. And that community was built to help people find their way back to God. To bring God back to the center of their life on God's terms, not their terms. Because we can never find our destiny in solitude. It needs each other. And God knew that. So he created and built the church for us. And that's why we, to this day, continue to build. Not around ourselves, not on our terms, but we build on God's terms to fill the earth, to make a difference in our world. Let's pray together.